The Witches has been on my to-watch list since it came out in 2020, and I finally got around to watching it, and I can kind of understand why it's not done as well as I thought it would have done. It's got 5.4 out of 10 on IMDb across 49,000 reviews and ratings. It's not a terrible rating, but based purely on the trailers and the casting and the costumes look amazing. I kind of thought that seemed a little bit low. Having now watched it, I can kind of agree with that. This was directed by Robert Zemeckis. It's written by Zemeckis, Kenya Barris, and Guillermo del Toro. And we have a brilliant cast. To name just a few, we have Anne Hathaway, Octavia Spencer, Stanley Tucci, Chris Rock. Great cast. The story is a great one. I have read Roald Dahl's book before, but quite a long time ago, so I can't, in this discussion, compare it to the book. I genuinely can't remember a lot of the specifics of the book, just the overarching narrative, but if anybody has any specific thoughts on that, please feel free to share. But it's about these witches who meet at this hotel for their gathering, and they're very anti-children, and it just so happens that a young boy is there with his grandmother, and things get pretty dangerous. And I'll say no more than that. I could possibly go into a little bit more detail, but I don't want to give away anything just in case you're not familiar with the story. And as a concept, I love it. I think it's exactly the kind of film I would have loved as a child. Because despite the fact I was very scared of this isn't a scary film, but I was very scared of scary films in general as a child. But anything about witches or ghosts, I love. So Hocus Pocus, Casper, I loved those films in particular. So anything about witches, I would have adored. And I think as a child, I would have liked this a lot more. There are definitely a lot of fun childlike elements. There are some good special effects and things. But for me as an older viewer, I feel like, and I wasn't expecting to think this, but I feel like it's slightly teetering towards being more of a children's film than a family film. I'd still say it's a family film, but maybe only just. It was very slow as well. It definitely was quite slow in a lot of places. Certain scenes were longer than they needed to be. The performances are brilliant, though. I thought Anne Hathaway in particular did an absolutely amazing job as the Grand High Witch, and I thought she looked fabulous. The costumes in this do look brilliant, and I will check just now who did the costumes while I'm looking at this on IMDb. So in general, it's a decent enough film. Costumes are by Joanna Johnson, and the narrative works well enough. Visually, it is stunning. Also, if you go onto IMDb and you look at the full cast list, there are 30, 40, in fact, I'm going to check. There are about 40 people just credited as being called Witch. So these are obviously all of the witches who have gathered there, and it's a really great scene when we first get to see them all gathered there together. It's really exciting, and actually probably one of my favourite scenes. But I feel like once the main narrative is established, for me, that's when it started to feel like more of a children's film than a family film. And it just seems like I didn't enjoy it as much as I wanted to. And the narrative itself maybe isn't as engaging as I wanted it to be. And I don't remember thinking that about the book. And I was an adult when I read the book as well. It's not as if I read it as a child and now I'm having a different perspective on the story as an adult, because for some reason, I don't know why, I didn't read a lot of Roald Dahl growing up. And I find that quite strange. So as an adult, I started to plug that gap. And I read The Witches maybe 10 years ago, possibly. And I remember liking it quite a lot. And unfortunately, I just don't think the story in the film is as strong as it could be. It's definitely quite slow. And there are times, as I said, when it felt a little bit more like a children's film. It was inconsistent with that. The costumes, though, stunning. The hotel design, I love. In fact, is it filmed in a real hotel? I honestly don't know. According to IMDb, this was filmed in Surrey and Georgia and Alabama and Leavesden. So I don't believe it was a real hotel, but if anybody knows anything about that, again, please feel free to share. And in general, it's an okay film. And as I said, going into it, I thought, how can that only have 5.4 out of 10? It looks incredible. The cast is incredible. I was expecting to give it a high 6, maybe even a 7. And unfortunately, that's not the case. I do agree with that rating in general. And I guess it was worth the wait. I wouldn't say I adored it, but I wasn't totally disappointed by it either. And I guess I can sum up by saying The Witches is a pretty average film with some really strong aspects. Costumes, performances, set designs, or the hotel, but with some weaker aspects as well, mainly the execution of the narrative. So it's not a great film. And while I'm a little bit disappointed by that, maybe my initial expectations were too high. I was, after all, just basing it purely on the trailer and the costumes and the cast. It looked amazing. In terms of the execution, it's not that great, but it is watchable. It's more than watchable. The Witch is an okay film. Definitely room for improvement, but ultimately not a bad experience. And if you've been considering watching it, then I'd say it's probably worth checking out.